When a small-town sheriff rips medals off a frail veteran's chest, he thinks he's won. But the man who walks into the hall minutes later leaves everyone speechless. I've never been one for crowds. Never liked the way voices pile up, each one fighting to be heard, or how folks stare when they think you're not looking. But that afternoon in Eldridge, Missouri, as the sun dipped low over Copperfield Avenue, I found myself standing on the patchy lawn of the community center, surrounded by the hum of the town's Veterans Day ceremony. The air carried the smoky tang of grilled hot dogs, the sweetness of fresh-cut grass, and the faint twang of a local band strumming out Sweet Home Alabama on a makeshift stage. Kids darted through the crowd, their sparklers trailing light like fireflies, while families sprawled on folding chairs, their paper plates sagging with potato salad and coleslaw. It was the kind of small-town scene that could make you forget the world's sharp edges until they cut you. I'm Leonard Hargrove, though most folks just call me Len. At 78, I don't move as fast as I used to, not with the shrapnel still lodged in my left leg from a chopper crash in '67. My cane's become a friend these past few years, its walnut grip worn smooth by my calloused hands. That day, I wore my old olive green service jacket, the one I'd kept folded in a cedar chest since Nixon was in office. Pinned to it were 3 medals, a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a Vietnam Service Medal. They weren't there for show. I don't care for applause or backslaps. I wore them for the boys whose names are carved on that granite slab across the lawn, the ones who never made it back from Da Nang. I'd come to lay a wreath at the war memorial, a simple thing I'd woven myself from red, white, and blue ribbons with a handful of wildflowers plucked from the ditch near my trailer on Pine Hollow Road. The flowers were wilting, their petals curling in the late October heat, but they were honest, like the prayer I whispered as I set the wreath down. "For you, brothers," I said under my breath, my voice rough as gravel. I didn't need anyone to hear it. It wasn't for them. As I straightened up, my knee protesting with a familiar stab, a young woman nearby caught my eye. She was juggling a toddler on her hip and a plate of food, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She smiled, soft and genuine. "Thank you for your service," she said, nodding at my medals. I tipped my head, feeling the weight of her words. "Just did my part, ma'am," I replied, my voice low but warm. Her name was Marla, I'd learn later. Marla Jenkins, a waitress at the diner on Route 32. In that moment, her kindness was a small light in a world that often felt dim. I turned back to the memorial, planning to slip away before the speeches started. I've heard enough politicians in my time, and their words always ring hollow next to the silence of the dead. But before I could take a step, a voice cut through the crowd like a rifle shot. "Hey, old man, you think you're some kind of war hero with those shiny pins?" I froze, my hand tightening on my cane. The voice was loud, brash, and belonged to Sheriff Dwayne Carver, a man I'd seen around town but never had much cause to speak to. He stood a few yards off, his stocky frame filling out his khaki uniform, his thumbs hooked into his duty belt like he owned the ground he stood on. His buzz cut gleamed under the sun, and his deputy badge caught the light, flashing like a warning. Behind him, a handful of younger men in trucker hats and work boots snickered, their eyes glinting with the kind of amusement that comes from watching someone else squirm. I turned slowly, keeping my face steady. I've faced worse than a loudmouth with a badge, jungles where the air burned your lungs, nights where the only sound was the whistle of incoming mortars. "Just paying my respects, Sheriff," I said, my drawl calm but firm. "Ain't here to stir trouble." Carver snorted, stepping closer, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The crowd hushed, sensing the shift, though the band played on, oblivious. "Respects, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You look like you got those medals from a thrift store. What'd you do in Nan Nam? Type reports in some air-conditioned office?" The men behind him laughed, though some looked uneasy, their eyes darting to the ground. Marla frowned, clutching her toddler tighter, her plate of potato salad forgotten. My jaw clenched, but I didn't bite. I'd heard this kind of talk before. Men who never saw a battlefield thinking they could measure a soldier's worth. I've buried friends, carried their weight through mud and blood, A sheriff's sneer wasn't going to break me. "I went where they sent me," I said, keeping my eyes on his. "That's all." Carver's smirk widened, and he closed the distance between us, close enough that I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Where they sent you," he mocked, mimicking my drawl. "You know what, Hargrove? I'm sick of you old-timers acting like this town owes you something, strutting around in that rag of a jacket like you're Audie Murphy." The crowd's murmurs grew, some shifting in their chairs, others leaning forward. I could feel their eyes on me, some pitying, some curious, none stepping in. My hand twitched on my cane, not from fear, but from the effort to keep my temper leashed. I came here for the dead, not to dance for a man who thought a badge made him king. But Carver wasn't done. Quick as a snake, he reached out and grabbed the purple heart pinned to my chest. With a sharp tug, he tore it free, ripping a jagged hole in my jacket. The crowd gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in my chest. "Give that back," I said, my voice low, a steel edge cutting through the words. That metal wasn't just metal. It was the night I dragged Private Ellison out of a burning chopper. Shrapnel tearing through my leg, the heat scorching my lungs. It was proof of a promise kept. Carver dangled it in front of me, taunting, then yanked the Bronze Star and Vietnam Service Medal off, tearing another hole. The medals clinked as they hit the dirt, and my heart thudded, heavy and slow. The Bronze Star was for a firebase we held against a tide of Viet Cong, a night where dawn felt like a dream we'd never see. The Service Medal was for 3 tours, years of my life I'd never get back. They weren't trinkets, they were my history. "You call these medals?" Carver said, holding the Purple Heart up like a cheap carnival prize. "Bet you got 'em for showing up to roll call." He tossed it into the dirt with the others, and the crowd's murmurs turned to shocked whispers. Marla stepped forward, her face flushed. "That's enough, Sheriff!" she snapped, her voice trembling but fierce. "He's a veteran. Have some damn respect." Carver turned on her, his eyes narrowing. "Mind your business, Marla. This ain't your fight." He jabbed a finger at me. "And you, pick up your junk and get out of here before I haul you off for disturbing the peace." I didn't move. The medals lay in the dirt, glinting faintly in the fading light. Every eye was on me, waiting. I've faced moments like this before, not with sheriffs, but with officers who thought they could break a man with words. They never did. "You shouldn't have done that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that made Carver's smirk falter, just for a heartbeat. He recovered fast, stepping closer, his boot inches from the medals. "Or what, old man? You gonna chase me with that cane?" His buddies laughed again, louder, feeding off his bravado. He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "Folks, this is what I'm talking about. Old relics like him think they can waltz in, acting like they're better than us just 'cause they got some pins." Some nodded along, caught in his bluster, but others looked away, shame flickering in their eyes. Marla knelt beside me, her toddler clinging to her, and started picking up the medals. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick. I gave her a nod, my throat tight. "Ain't your fault," I said, pinning the medals back on, my hand steady despite the fire in my chest. I turned toward the community center, my cane tapping softly. Carver's voice followed me. "Where are you going, Hargrove? Show's over for you." I didn't answer. I had one more thing to do, and no sheriff was going to stop me. You won't believe who stood up for me next. This is just the start. Things are about to get a whole lot heavier. "I've walked through worse than this," I told myself as I stepped into the Eldridge Community Center, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the linoleum floor. The place smelled of old wood and lemon polish, like a church basement after a potluck, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows across the rows of folding chairs. The crowd was packed tight, folks in flannel and jeans fanning themselves with paper programs, their voices a low hum of anticipation. Up on the stage, a banner read, "Eldridge honors our heroes." But after what happened outside, those words felt like a cruel joke. My jacket was torn, the holes where my medals had been ripped off gaping like wounds, though I'd pinned them back on, crooked but proud. My knee ached with every step, a reminder of shrapnel and choices made long ago. but I held my head high. I wasn't here to make a scene, just to sit through a ceremony for the men who never got to grow old like me. Marla Jenkins followed close behind, her toddler balanced on her hip, his small hands clutching her sleeve. Her face was flushed from the confrontation outside, but her eyes burned with a fire I recognized, the kind that comes from seeing something wrong and refusing to stay quiet. She'd stood up to Sheriff Carver when no one else would, and that took guts. I gave her a small nod, grateful, but didn't say anything. Words don't always fix what's broken. The room was a sea of faces, some familiar, some not. Old folks with weathered hands, young couples with kids, a few teenagers slouched in their chairs, scrolling on their phones. Mayor Vernon Tate was at the podium, fussing with his note cards, his thin frame hunched under a suit that looked a size too big. He glanced up as I made my way to an empty chair in the back, his eyes darting nervously. I could tell he'd heard about the ruckus outside. Most folks had. The whispers followed me like a shadow, some sympathetic, others sharp with judgment. I've learned over the years that people love a spectacle, especially when it's not their fight. I eased into the chair, my cane resting against my leg, and adjusted my medals. The Purple Heart caught the light, its faint gleam a quiet defiance. I wasn't here to prove anything to anyone, but those medals. They weren't just metal. They were the weight of nights spent under fire, of brothers lost, of promises kept when it would have been easier to break them. Marla sat beside me, settling her boy on her lap. "You okay, Mr. Hargrove?" she whispered, her voice soft but urgent. "I'm fine, ma'am," I said, managing a half-smile. "Takes more than a loudmouth to ruin my day." It was a lie, of course. Carver's words had cut deeper than I'd let on, not because they were true, but because they weren't. I'd spent my life trying to live quietly, to carry the past without letting it define me. But when a man like Carver throws your sacrifices in the dirt, it's not just an insult, it's a theft. Before Marla could reply, a voice boomed across the room, sharp and mean. "Well, ain't this a sight? Thought I told you to go home, Hargrove." Sheriff Dwayne Carver stood near the stage, his arms crossed, his deputy badge glinting like he thought it made him untouchable. His buddies, Travis Boone, a burly mechanic with grease-stained knuckles, and Kyle Dempsey, a wiry clerk from the gas station on Route 32, flanked him, their smirks matching his. The crowd hushed, the air turning thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. I met his gaze, steady as I could manage. "Just here to hear the speeches, Sheriff," I said, keeping my voice even. "Same as you." Carver laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the low ceiling. "Hear the speeches?" he mocked, stepping into the aisle, his boots loud against the floor. "You don't belong here, old man. This ceremony's for real heroes, not some has-been playing dress-up in a jacket that's fallen apart." The words stung, sharper than I expected. I've heard worse in my time, officers barking orders in the mud, enemies shouting in languages I didn't understand. But this was different. This was home, a place where I'd hoped respect still meant something. The crowd was silent now, every eye on us. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others leaned forward, hungry for drama. I could feel Marla tense beside me, her toddler whimpering softly. "I earned my place," I said, my voice low but firm, the Missouri drawl carrying a weight I hadn't meant to show. "Same as any man or woman who served." Carver's smirk twisted, and he took another step, closing the gap. "Earned?" he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "You're leaning on a cane, wearing a coat that smells like mothballs. You're a relic, Hargrove. Nobody cares about your war stories." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms like a showman. "Am I right, folks? We're here to honor the living, not dig up some old-timer's past." A few of his buddies clapped, Travis and Kyle mostly, but the rest of the room was uneasy. A teenage girl, Haley Rivera, in a cheerleader's jacket, whispered to her friend, This is so messed up. Her friend nodded, but neither spoke up. An older woman, Edna Pritchard, the town librarian, clutched her purse, her lips pressed tight. I could see the anger in her eyes, but she stayed quiet, like most folks do when a bully's in charge. Carver wasn't done. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a taunt. Go on, tell us one of your big war stories, Hargrove. Bet it's a real page-turner. You saved the world with a typewriter? I felt a spark of anger flare in my chest, but I kept it caged. I've faced men like him before, loud, full of themselves, thinking they can break you with a sneer. You wouldn't understand, I said, my voice steady, though I let a bit of sharpness slip through. Takes more than a badge to know what a fight costs. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others looking away. Marla couldn't hold back anymore. She stood, her toddler clinging to her leg, and pointed at Carver. You're embarrassing yourself, Sheriff, she snapped, her voice shaking with fury. You tore his medals off outside like some kind of thug. You think that makes you look tough? Carver's face darkened, his jaw tightening. He wasn't used to being called out, especially not by a single mom who poured coffee for a living. Watch it, Marla, he growled, pointing a finger. You don't know what you're talking about. I know plenty, she shot back, her voice rising. I know you disrespected a veteran in front of this whole town. I know you're standing there acting like you're above him, when you're not fit to shine his boots. The crowd gasped, and I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride for her. She was young, barely 30, but she had the kind of courage that doesn't come from a uniform. Edna Pritchard stood now, her floral dress swaying as she pointed at Carver. She's right, Dwayne, she said, her voice trembling but clear. You've crossed a line. This is a disgrace to our town. Carver's eyes narrowed, and he turned to his buddies for support. Travis stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Y'all need to calm down, he said, his voice low and mean. Sheriff's just keeping order. This old guy's the one causing trouble. I looked at Travis, my gaze steady. Ain't causing nothing, I said, my voice calm but with an edge I hadn't used in years. Just trying to sit through a ceremony. You got a problem with that, son? Travis smirked, stepping closer. Yeah, I got a problem. You're ruining everybody's day. The room was a tinderbox now, every word a spark. Mayor Tate finally spoke up, his voice thin and shaky. Now, hold on, everyone, he said, waving his hands from the stage. Let's just calm down and get on with the program. But Carver wasn't interested in calm. He waved a hand at his deputies, Corey Vance and Javier Ortiz, who'd been hanging back near the wall. Get him out of here, he ordered, jerking his thumb at me. He's disrupting the peace. The deputies hesitated, their faces uneasy. Corey, the younger one, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Javier's hand twitched near his cuffs, but he didn't move. They'd seen what happened outside, and I could tell they weren't eager to make this worse. But Carver's glare left no room for debate. They started toward me, their boots heavy on the floor. Marla stepped in front of me, her toddler crying now. You're not touching him, she said, her voice fierce. This is wrong, and you know it. Corey raised his hands, almost pleading. Ma'am, just step aside, he said. We don't want trouble. Then don't make any, I said, standing slowly, my cane steady under my grip. I was shorter than them, my frame thin compared to their bulk. But I've faced worse odds. My eyes locked on Carver's, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in his. He didn't expect me to stand my ground. Not after everything. The crowd was on edge now, some standing, some shouting for Carver to back off, others urging me to leave. Haley Rivera was filming on her phone, her hands shaking. This is going viral, she muttered. Edna Pritchard looked ready to throw her purse at someone. The mayor tried again, his voice lost in the chaos. Please, everyone! But the doors at the back swung open with a loud creak, cutting him off. The room fell silent, every head turning. Something was coming, something that would change everything. What happens next, nobody saw coming. But it's going to turn this whole thing upside down. Keep reading. You won't believe how this ends. The Eldridge Community Center was a furnace of tension. The air so thick with anticipation it felt like it could snap. I stood there, my cane planted firm against the linoleum, my old service jacket torn but my medals pinned back on, their weight a reminder of battles fought and promises kept. Sheriff Dwayne Carver loomed over me, his face twisted with a sneer that was starting to crack under the pressure of the crowd's shifting mood. Marla Jenkins stood by my side, her toddler clinging to her skirt, her eyes blazing with defiance. The crowd, folks I'd known for years and strangers alike, watched in hushed silence, their whispers swallowed by the hum of the fluorescent lights. Mayor Vernon Tate, sweating through his ill-fitting suit, was at the podium, his note cards trembling in his hands, but nobody was looking at him. Every eye was on me, or on Carver, or on the double doors at the back of the room, which had just swung open with a heavy groan that echoed like a gunshot. I've seen my share of moments where the world holds its breath. Jungles lit by tracer fire, hospital wards filled with the moans of the wounded. But this was different. This was home, Eldridge, Missouri, where I'd hoped a man could lay a wreath for his fallen brothers without being spit on. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. The medals in the dirt, Carver's taunts, the crowd's silence. I'd faced worse than a sheriff with a chip on his shoulder, but it's a hard thing when your own town turns its back. Still, I kept my gaze steady, my voice quiet. I'd learned long ago that shouting doesn't win battles. Standing your ground does. The door's creak cut through the silence, and every head turned. A tall man strode in, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his navy blazer crisp against the dim light. His face was weathered like mine, but his posture was ramrod straight, the kind you don't lose after years of giving orders. A row of ribbons gleamed on his chest, and a silver eagle insignia on his lapel caught the light. Behind him came 3 others, 2 men and a woman, all in dress uniforms, their boots clicking in perfect rhythm. The woman held a folded American flag, her expression as sharp as a blade. The crowd parted like a river around a stone, their murmurs rising like a tide. Carver froze, his hand twitching near his badge. His buddies, Travis Boone and Kyle Dempsey, stepped back, their smirks fading. I felt Marla tense beside me, her toddler whimpering softly. I glanced at the man in the blazer, and a spark of recognition hit me, pulling me back to a jungle clearing in '67, smoke curling from a downed chopper. "Colonel Ramsey," I said, my voice low, almost lost in the crowd's hum. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Marcus Ramsey's eyes met mine, and for a moment, it was just us. 2 soldiers who'd seen the worst and lived to tell it. "Staff Sergeant Hargrove," he said, his voice deep and steady, carrying the weight of years. "Some debts don't get forgotten." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and the crowd's whispers grew louder, a mix of awe and confusion. Carver's face twitched, his bravado crumbling. "What's this?" he snapped, stepping forward, trying to reclaim control. "This is my jurisdiction. I don't care who you are. Hargrove's causing a disturbance, and I'm handling it." Ramsey turned to him, his gaze cold as winter. "Your jurisdiction?" he said, his voice cutting through the room. "You're the one disturbing this ceremony, Sheriff. I heard what you did outside, tearing medals off a veteran's chest. You care to explain why you disrespect a man who's earned more honor than you'll ever know?" The crowd gasped, the sound sharp and collective. Marla's hand flew to her mouth, and Edna Pritchard, the librarian, nodded fiercely, her purse clutched like a weapon. Haley Rivera, the cheerleader with the phone, zoomed in, her hands shaking as she recorded. I stood there, my cane steady, my heart heavy. I didn't want this moment, not the attention, not the spectacle. But it was here, and I'd face it like I'd faced everything else. Carver's face reddened, but he squared his shoulders. "This ain't your business, Colonel," he said, his voice tight. "Hargrove's been acting like he's some big shot disrupting our ceremony. Those medals? Probably bought 'em at a pawn shop." The room erupted in murmurs, some angry, some shocked. Edna stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "You're a disgrace, Dwayne Carver," she said. "Those medals are real. And you know it. You've shamed this town." Ramsey raised a hand, silencing the crowd. He turned to the woman in uniform, Captain Alicia Torres, her face stern but composed. "Captain, show them," he said. Torres stepped forward, unfolding the flag she carried. Tucked inside was a faded photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. She held it up, and I felt my breath catch. It was me, 20 years old, in jungle fatigues, my face streaked with dirt, standing beside a young Marcus Ramsey and a squad of Marines in a misty clearing near Khe San. The Purple Heart on my chest in the photo was the same one pinned to my jacket now, crooked but unbroken. Ramsey's voice filled the room, steady and commanding. "This is Staff Sergeant Leonard Hargrove, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, Vietnam, 1967. He saved my life when our chopper went down, dragging me through gunfire with shrapnel in his leg. That's his Purple Heart, his Bronze Star, for holding a firebase against a Viet Cong assault, 10-1, through a night most men wouldn't survive. His Vietnam Service Medal? 3 tours, when one was more than enough." The crowd was silent, every word landing like a stone. I looked down at my cane, my throat tight. I didn't need their applause, didn't want their pity. Those medals were for the men who didn't come home. Not for me. But Ramsey's voice carried on, relentless. "You, Sheriff, threw that honor in the dirt. You disrespected a man who's done more for this country than you can imagine, and you did it on a day meant to celebrate sacrifice." Marla was crying now, her toddler clapping, unaware of the weight of it all. Haley's phone was still rolling, capturing every second. The crowd stirred, some standing, their faces a mix of shame and pride. I felt their eyes on me, but I kept mine on the floor, the memories flooding back, gunfire, screams, the weight of a wounded man in my arms. Ramsey stepped closer to Carver, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What's your excuse, Sheriff? You think a badge gives you the right to judge a man's service?" Carver stammered, his face pale. "I didn't know," he said, his voice barely audible. "I thought he was just—" "You thought wrong," Ramsey cut in, his words sharp as a bayonet. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising. "This man is a hero, and you let him be humiliated. You stood by while his medals were disgraced. That's not what Eldridge stands for. That's not what America stands for." The room exploded in applause, chairs scraping as people stood. Marla's tears fell freely now, and she squeezed my arm, her voice thick. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hargrove." Edna marched forward, pointing at Carver. "Resign, Dwayne," she said, her voice ringing. "This town deserves better." Carver's hands shook, his eyes darting for an ally, but Travis and Kyle had slipped to the back, their heads down. The deputies, Corey and Javier, stared at the floor, their faces flushed with shame. Mayor Tate, finally finding his nerve, stepped forward. "Sheriff Carver," he said, his voice unsteady but firm, "step outside. Let us finish this ceremony with the respect it deserves." The crowd roared, some chanting, "Get out!" Carver looked at me, his mouth opening, but no words came. I met his gaze, my face calm, my heart steady. He'd tried to break me, but he didn't know what I'd carried all these years. Without a word, he turned and stormed out, the doors slamming behind him. Ramsey extended a hand to me. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice warm now. "It's time you took your place." I hesitated, then took his hand, rising slowly. The crowd parted as I walked to the stage, Ramsey and the soldiers at my side. Marla followed, her toddler waving at me with a toothy grin. As I stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening, a wave of sound that shook me to my core. Tate handed me the microphone, his eyes shining. I looked out at the crowd, my medals glinting under the lights. "I didn't come here for this," I said, my voice rough but clear. "I came for the men who didn't make it back. But if I've got your ear, hear this. Respect ain't about medals or uniforms. It's about standing for something bigger than yourself. That's all I ever tried to do." The crowd surged forward, hands reaching out, voices offering apologies and thanks. I stepped back, handing the microphone to Ramsey. I'd said my piece. As I left the stage, the weight of their eyes followed me. But for the first time that day, it didn't feel heavy.